here. I think we're live. Yeah, we're live on YouTube, and we're live now with Facebook, I hope. Good evening, Ben. And tonight we're going to talk about, I know Ben's pet subject, UFOs, and the Warminster Thing, and what an incident I actually saw, an unidentified, I wouldn't say flying object, but something unidentified in the sky when I was very young in the late 60s, and it was witnessed by thousands of people, and it actually had a mention on the radio. And also, I can just about remember when there was that UFO flap in the late 60s, where there was, what was it now? Flying crosses in the West Country, and the Warminster Thing, which, we're going to sort of chat about tonight, but I better stop waffling now. You're the expert on these type of things, but I've got two little stories that may be of interest to people that are ufologists. So could you give a sort of background of what was happening in this flap of the late 1960s?
It's really quite extraordinary because it's one of the longest UFO flaps in history. What happened was in 1964, on Christmas time, there's a guy called Arthur Shuttleworth. I think he was, I don't know if he was a vicar or someone from the church, I'm not sure, but he saw some really strange objects in the sky and heard an incredibly loud noise in the area of Warminster, a place called Cradle Hill, which is quite close to Warminster. And he reported these things, and this was the start of a large number of other people who started seeing the same things. And what happened was it seemed to become quite common for people to go out, especially in the area of Cradle Hill, and see some really odd lights and other objects in the sky. You often hear loud explosions and buzzings and whinings and all the sounds associated with flying saucers. Now, the word spread, and people came from all over the world to Warminster to skywatch on Cradle Hill. And I think the term skywatching actually emerged from that. Now, the Cradle Hill itself is a lovely place. It seems almost charged with destiny. So you've got up a long, straight farmer's track, and you come out on an area where there's a couple of huts, and you get a magnificent view of the valley over the town of Warminster and its surroundings. And before long, it became almost a culture around it. There was a huge number of people camping there, to bring in caravan. They also lived there, and it became such a...
Ben, can I interrupt? I'm terribly sorry. Sure. I hope you don't think this is rude. Yes, it is rude. Someone on the chat room just said there's a bad echo.
Yes, I know. I think if we wait for the technical problems all to go away, we're never going to do this show, Chris.
Yeah, okay.
You know what I mean?
Righto. But I just thought I'd mention that. I don't know if it might be to lower the sound. I don't know whether it might be feedback.
Could you plug in earphones rather than having a speaker?
Yeah, but I haven't got the headphones handy, so I think we just have to carry on. I'm sorry about that. But I'm terribly sorry for cutting in. I'm terribly sorry about that.
This program seems to be cursed with things like this. And, so you might wait forever for it to be perfect. But to just continue, in August of 1965, there was actually a meeting in the town hall of Warminster where the local authorities were very concerned about this. And indeed, there was actually a 50th anniversary conference in 2015 I went along to. And I listened to several people speaking about this event, including Kevin Goodman, who's a local researcher who has covered this in detail. And indeed, a man called Peter Paget, who is I don't he specialises in UFOs now, but in the late 70s he was a ufologist, and he edited a magazine all about the Warminster Thing, because this flap didn't end suddenly. It kind of petered out in the 1970s. I think the mid-70s, it kind of stopped. It didn't end in a particular time. Even today, there are people who report seeing strange things on Cradle Hill, especially. and other and the surrounding areas. I mean, I've got a friend called Mike Oram who's written a book in which he describes his own not only UFOs, but close encounters of the third kind.
Really?
Aliens.
Wow.
Strange creatures we've seen, yeah. And he's not the only one.
Strange. What about those flying crosses? I remember that in the newspapers, even though I was sort of very young. And police officers seeing it. I think probably Gary Heseltine would probably not be really into that. But
it's I remember there's a flap up. I was just like saying those flap up flying triangles over Belgium. I remember the flying crosses in the 70s. There's lots of reports on those.
Yes.
In the 60s and 70s.
Well, would you like my take on the Warminster Thing from what I discovered? And what it was in the 1970s, I just started work, and I was a bit like Pike out of Dad's Army, stupid boy. I think we all went through that stage. And I worked in London, and at that time, the Bermuda Triangle, Charles Berlitz wrote all these books on it, and that, and Eric von Daniken and all that was really in the spotlight. And the bookshops were really sort of, this was long before the internet and things like that. And bookshops used to have the latest books out, and authors were going like clappers to actually get these books out. And I used to read everything from that. I was mad on it. And where I worked in an architect's practice, but it was also structural engineers as well. And it was mixed. And there was a structural engineer that was an ex-army chap. And you always knew when he was around because he had these squeaky shoes. And, haircut, sort of redneck, but one of the nicest people who could ever wish to meet. And when you're younger, everybody looks old, but I should think he may have been close on retirement. I don't know. He seemed a little bit older, but he went into the army. And I'm only guessing now, I should think in the late 40s, early 50s. He was just a bit too young to be in World War II. And he was in the Royal Engineers, and he had a fantastic job near the end of his career. He worked in an area down in the West Country. I know he lived in Hampshire, and he lived in a thatched cottage, and him and his missus, the real typical sort of, hoity-toity sort of people, but again, very nice. And he had this job where he wore civilian clothing, and it was a need to know, and they made things for the Ministry of Defence. So if the Ministry of Defence said, I don't know, they wanted exploding dog poo or something, they'd probably make it. But it was a need to know. And what happened is, he said he did 9 till 5. He dressed in civilians, and the only time he had to dress in his military clothing was when he went to the base, because the other ranks. I think he must have been a high rank, but how he became a civil engineer, I don't know. But on with the story. I used to read these books, and lunchtimes he would sort of walk past my board, look over, and what's that? And sort of look at the book, give it back to me with a sort of expression of Warminster Thing. But it was about that 1960s flap. And he came along with his squeaky shoes. So there, what is this? I said, it's about the Warminster Thing. Oh! He looked at it, looking through the pages. Stay there a moment. So anyway, he had his sandwiches because he used to buy his lunch, and this was lunchtime. He came over to where I was, and he said, you might be interested in this. Now, he's not the type of person to tell a fancy story. He was, let's put it this way, if you had to go into battle, you'd want him leading you into battle. He was a very solid, no rubbish. And what he said, you could believe. And he so I don't think he was pulling a fast one. He wasn't that type of person. Anyway, what he said is that where he worked, he said there came an order in to go and buy the best radio-controlled aircraft that money could buy in those days, because I think he was coming to the end of his career in the late 60s when this Warminster Thing was happening. And he went up to London, went to Beattie's, which was the model making sort of capital, and said, I want the best. radio-controlled aircraft you've got in stock? And he got it and went back to where he worked. And the specification was to suit this thing up. Now, radio controllers before was it's prohibitively expensive. I mean, when I was a kid at school, nobody had it because it was so expensive. And it was only very rich people. And it was adults that used remote controlled aircraft. And they were, shall we say, upper class people that could afford it. Well, they got this aircraft and it had to have a larger fuel tank. They had to soup up the engine, and the specifications were really strict. And they had to have technical fellas to do something to the remote control to make it go further and repair it or get another one. And we need it within a certain amount of time. And we want you to go to Warminster with it. Okay. So he went to Warminster with it. And apparently, reading between the lines, what had happened is a load of army chaps had used this aeroplane and smashed it up because they didn't know how to control it. So they decided to send him along to control it. And it had luminous streamers on it. And it was part of the specification to make a certain sound. And his job was to, and again, it was ask no questions, he didn't know, is to fly it over Warminster and then monitor, and this is what these chaps were doing in this, he didn't tell me who they were, people's response. And at that, he said, oh, well, hope you find that interesting, walked off. So that's rather an interesting take. I think it's true. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's true because he was the type of person not to pull a fast one. He'd obviously signed the Official Secrets Act, so I don't know how he's allowed to tell me that, but he must have known it was public or something. I don't know, but that was what I took at it. And I'm wondering whether the government knew there was something funny going along in Warminster and did what they usually do, and that is try to create a diversion to say, oh, it was, it was a load of kids playing with an aeroplane or something. I don't know. It's strange. I wonder what you make of that, Ben.
That is extraordinary, although it's not without precedent. I've heard similar stories, mostly from the United States, of things like that going on. Now, it's odd. I mean, obviously, you're this guy you work with. He was told what he needed to know. That is to get the aircraft, the drones, and to modify them. So they have to be modified. You described they were customized, these drones.
Oh yes, very much. I don't know if it was one or several. I can't remember. I literally can't remember it. That's so long ago. But it had to have had to have a very long range for a model airplane.
But what? I mean, you said that some people wanted to monitor or observe how the villagers or the townsfolk of Warminster responded to the presence of this drone with luminous streamers.
This was at 2 o'clock in the morning. This is early hours of the morning they flew around. They didn't do it during the day.
Did they tell them why, or who? Was it someone from the intelligence services or the police, or was it?
No.
Did they say why they wanted to do this?
No. That's all he told me.
Necessarily told why.
I mean, that's all he told me. So I don't know any more than what I've just told you. Apart from, he said it was in the early hours of the morning, and they flew it very low over the town there, and it was. He gathered. He said it was to monitor people's response. But he said that's all. That's all he knew about it because he was in a need to know. So we can make of that whatever. I don't know any more than that. I don't know if it was one or it was several. And the only way he got to Warminster and knew it was for Warminster is because the stupid idiots had smashed it up. They had to repair it, and then he was the only one that knew how to fly it. So that's why they used it.
It's obviously this is some kind of psychological operation. A psychological warfare attack of some kind on the people of the town. Now, it can't. I mean, this was in the late '60s, so this would have been the height of the actual Warminster flat.
Yes.
And I can't help wondering if, well, I mean, there must be the strange UFO sightings that were going on at the time. The purpose of it now, well, there's several different theories about. I mean, why it's been done. There's several different ideas. There's a guy called Mark Pilkington who's written a lot about this, and I don't agree with most of his theses, but it's complicated business. But what he would have done, in effect, I suppose, would have been to possibly cause confusion or to put in basically to insert a convenient cover story.
Yes.
It could, I mean, they could say that someone had a drone up there with luminous stripes. They don't have to say it was the army. They said someone was using a drone with luminous stripes, and that therefore is the explanation for the entire phenomenon from 1964 onwards. That they're simply, you know, the drone enthusiasts, as you said, it was a rare thing in those days. I mean, these things. You mentioned that these kinds of aircraft were expensive.
Oh, prohibitively. I mean, radio control, anything radio control was prohibitively expensive.
I mean, nowadays, of course, it's quite. It's not so. It's quite easy to get hold of very cheap ones, and you know, you can buy them from catalogues. But it would have been convenient. I mean, to me, this indicates the government definitely were aware of the Warminster Thing, and this seems to be some kind of positive disinformation, maybe. I mean, that's all I can think of right now as a possibility. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to send the recording of this to Peter Paget and to Kevin Goodwin and see what they think. Because I'm sure they'll be very interested in what we're talking about this evening.
Yes. I mean, there was another situation where I'll be as brief as possible, but this is actually thanks to Gary Heseltine. He got this list, or put, he showed on his, I can't remember, but I know that was somebody doing a list of all UFO sightings. And it was in 1969. I didn't realise this. And I was very young, and this was in Enfield, in what was Middlesex, but is now North London. And I think it must have been springtime, because I remember it was very warm. I mean, I was very young, but I've never forgotten it. And it must have been a Saturday, because we were going to the shops, and it was late, and shops used to close in those days about 5 o'clock. And I remember I was sitting at the back of my car with my sister, and my mum and dad were at the front. And as we drove into Enfield town, it's a one-way system, and it's a very wide road. I think it's either 3 or 4 lanes. And it's still the same today. So if you look it up on Google Maps, you could see High Street. And cars were just stopped here, there, and everywhere. And people looking up. So being inquisitive, my dad stopped, and there's a police car, and there's 2 policemen looking up at this. And what it was, there was these lights, and this must have been, as I say, it was spring, late spring, early summer evening, so, and 5-ish, 5:30 touch, and they were blue and orange, and they went from one side of the horizon, and this was looking towards the south, right the way over to the other side of the horizon in a split second. And then you had, say, 6 of them all going out and then conjoining to one. And then they were just moving all around the sky. And Enfield town was stationary. People were gazing up. It was quite incredible. And we sat watching this for a long time, but we had to get home. And I remember my dad driving around the stopped stationary cars to get out of Enfield because there's so many cars parked there. And we tuned into the radio next day, and they said there has been the switchboards have been jammed by people seeing strange lights in the sky, but there's nothing to worry about. The American Air Force planes refueling. Now, would they refuel over London? And I'm sorry, no, they weren't American Air Force planes refueling. In the local paper that week, they had it, and they said it was search lamps. Now, my parents went through World War II, and they know what search lamps look like. They were not search lamps. But I remember, but to me, my personal view is it looked like some form of animal species in the sky that we don't know about, because its behavior was more like, you know, you see these sort of coral reefs where things move in and out. It was moving like an animal, but from one side of the horizon to the other in a split second. You blink, you miss it, boom, then they're back again. The speed was beyond anything we could have in technology, and it was going on right. And then it was search lamps is just a complete and utter joke, you know.
Yeah, two cover stories for the same phenomenon is a bit. Is pushing it a bit. I mean, when that happens, you know that they're struggling to find ways of fooling people. What you described certainly not an aircraft.
Oh no!
I mean, the colours and the behaviour, not an aircraft. Now that's amazing, one, especially when there were multiple witnesses, which you would expect over in North London.
It's thousands of people, because they said the switchboards were jammed with people phoning in. There's so many people saw it because it was towards London. We was in the north, and Enfield's just on the streets. You know, it's just on the fringe of London. But I've never forgotten it. It was quite. I mean, I was very young, but I've never forgotten. The colours were incredible, but the way they sort of spread out, and then suddenly go back again, then spread out again, then go back again. It was really. It was breathtaking. I mean, there was no video cameras in those days, and it's a pity because, you know, smartphones or anything like that. I'm not sure if anybody captured it on film, but you know,
if they did, it's never been public. I mean, I've not heard of this case before. Actually, I've not heard of it.
Yes, it's actually listed. There is. That's how I found out it was 1969 because I didn't know what year it was, and I found out it was 1969.
There's no doubt that there are strange things seen in the sky by people almost all the time, every day, that don't fit into any known phenomenon that we are aware of. They're not birds, aircraft, kites. They're not weather balloons and lightning strikes and things like that. I don't know what they are. From what I've seen in terms of my witnesses to close encounters of the third kind, it appears not a non-human intelligence is interacting with this planet.
Oh, yeah.
I say that in all seriousness. I think the evidence is overwhelming for that the case. It's virtually proved. It's virtually proven.
Do you think the government is hard? You see, I did a film once of people, ufologists, threw their toys out of pram and took the wrong end of the stick. They really did. And you was the only person that didn't. And what I said, and I think I might have got it over wrong, so I do apologise to anybody. Take offence. Oh, I think my camera just fallen off. There we go. Hang on a moment. It's right on YouTube. Yeah, we're here. Right, here we go. We're back again. I think what actually. So I'm using something technical. It's called a piece of tape to keep it up there. No, I think what I said was that governments use this phenomena to actually send disinformation out, and they use it at times of war as well to send disinformation out. And they always do give you a little bit of truth, then some fiction, then some truth, then some fiction, and muddle it all up to make people that look into it look stupid. And it's like most things. You know, it's like I disagree with this thing about global warming. I think it's a load of old rubbish. It's a tax collecting scam. But if you say that amongst these people that are protesting, oh, you're an idiot, you're stupid, you're thick, you don't know what you're talking about, and all that sort of stuff. And I think this is what the government do. They know that people are seeing strange things in the sky, and they've always liked to sort of show that they know what they're doing and all this, that, and the other. So they're just, and I think that probably ufologists know more than the governments do. That's my theory.
Well, it depends. I mean, the idea of muddling up rather than cover up. I mean, it was Andrew Johnson, actually, a British researcher, who said that, and he's absolutely right. The suppression alone does not work. What works is suppression mixed with disinformation. People who know an awful lot about human psychology, people we were talking about on the last show, like the Tavistock Institute, etc., they're employed by the government to deal with this subject in a kind of classified capacity. I think the government know a hell of a lot more than they're letting on. I don't. Some people say, I know the idea of they don't want to admit they don't know, and they just want to prevent public panic. I mean, the idea of preventing public panic is a possibility. I mean, it shows how little respect the government has for people. Well, they think that everyone's just going to panic. We find out about this thing. But I believe they have decisive physical evidence. There's many occasions where it appears that decisive physical evidence of an extraterrestrial presence has actually appeared on Earth and has essentially been taken away, taken out of public view, and the people have been forbidden from seeing it. And what's more, the drones with the streamers sort of thing has been employed. The fake story, which this colleague of yours said he was involved in, are now a standard tactic. So,
Yes.
that situation. I mean, I'm going to take you back to the Roswell incident, which is the most famous.
Still there, Ben? I think you've gone down again. What's happened? Oh, no. I think we've lost Ben. I don't know quite what's going on here. Oh, I lost myself. No, I don't know what's going on. Having trouble connecting. Oh, well, that doesn't surprise me. Ben, I think you're back.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm sorry about that. It just says has problems connecting. So, but anyway, I think the monkey's back on the generator. So I think we should be going. You're saying about the Roswell incident.
Yes, this is an event in July of 1947 where what I believe is definitely an artifact of an extraterrestrial civilization came to grief on the Earth's surface in New Mexico, USA, and was secretly salvaged by the government. The government then put out a fake story. They said it was a weather balloon, and the newspapers reported that. And that's the stance they remain. They've changed their cover story a few times, just like with the Enfield case, but they maintain nothing extraterrestrial took place that day. They insist on that. It's live. And what's more, there are many other events that are very similar, which have happened around the world, and there's been a couple in this country.
Well, that's right. I'm probably going to upset a lot of people now. I don't think man has ever walked on the moon, ever. I think it's the greatest science fiction film ever done. Because when you look at the scientific evidence, no. And when you look at Richard D. Hall, he contacted a chap who does witness statement evidence.
Peter Hyatt.
Peter Hyatt, yes. And those Apollo astronauts were allegedly lying out of their back teeth. So I think the government are brilliant at faking things. I mean, you've only got to look at the Manhattan Project. That was, nobody knew about that. It's a need to know situation. People only told what they need to know.
Yeah, I mean, in my view, I think people may well have hit the moon, but if they went to the moon, it was on classified missions. I don't think the Apollo missions, the one that was done publicly, are a true and accurate record of man's exploration of the moon. I don't think they actually went to the moon. Like yourself, I believe it was essentially a sci-fi movie. I mean, there's a lot of evidence from many different researchers that indicates that the TV and photography of the mission was done in a studio. What we know about the engineering side of things and about the risk of radiation indicates that such a mission could not have been done using the methods that were done. It'd just be too dangerous. I mean, the astronauts would be killed, and several other reasons. So, I mean, that was fake. It was a publicity stunt carried out for some reason. They maybe thought it was necessary for people to believe they'd been in the moon, possibly as a part of Cold War politics.
I think it was mined off of the Vietnam War, because it's funny that the Apollo missions were phased out when the Vietnam War came to an end. Strange coincidence. I think it served the purpose.
Yeah, it certainly did. I mean, people who were alive at the time, who I've spoken to, people like my friend Marcus Allen, who actually...
Oh, I know Marcus.
This is one of the chief...
Nexus magazine.
No, Marcus. Yeah, that's right. He publishes the Nexus magazine. I mean, he told us that in that particular decade, which was an unhappy and worrying decade, it was a decade full of fear. And that people thought, well, we're all going to die. I mean, we may reach 697. But no way is any human going to be alive by 1980. Everyone was convinced that within a few years there'd be some kind of giant nuclear holocaust. And I guess the Vietnam War was a terrible tragedy. It was a terrible crime. It's a massive, massive mistake. And the soldiers were going back in coffins, and trees were being cut, were like losing their leaves, and there was chemical attacks. babies were being born without legs, things like that. It was a horrible situation.
Oh.
And it divided the country. But then Marcus said that for just a short time, in July of 1969, it was like the whole world was united.
Yes.
It took on it was almost a spiritual experience for people. It was like a kumbaya moment. There was people cheering in the United States, but they were also cheering in the Soviet Union and indeed even in Hanoi in North Vietnam. People were celebrating. They were watching on TV and they were celebrating in the midst of this war. It was almost like a Christmas truce in 1914.
Well, it's a bit like a late friend of mine, sadly no longer with us, Robert Newman. He looked into Mozart, and he said that he called it the Mozart myth, and he said that Mozart was just average, and because the Hungarian Austro-Hungarian Empire was losing battle after battle after battle, they needed something to boost things. So they got Mozart, and he was one of the first sort of, shall we say, like the Spice Girls of whatever. So he was just hyped up, and he had proof that most of his music was written by someone else, by other people. And he wrote one piece of music, and he'd done his research very thoroughly, and he proved it. And I believe him, because when you listen to Mozart, his music is very different all the way through. I mean, I'm no expert on it. But he said, what did it do? It raised people's feelings, hyped things up. Because let's face it, go back to the Vietnam War and the moon landings, it's no coincidence that the film 2001: A Space Odyssey came out in the late 60s.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of Mozart, I suppose he was an Austrian guy, and he became a great composer when there was... I mean, I remember from the film Amadeus, they were talking about how Italy was kind of like the leader in the world of opera, and but they wanted someone that Austria wanted to kind of compete with Italy. Well, Italy didn't exist as a state in those days, but so that area was like the greatest in the world of opera, and they said they wanted to have an opera composer in Austria. So I mean, I don't know much about that, but that's something I remember from the film Amadeus, the famous.
I saw that. I quite liked it. Yes.
Yeah.
But
you mentioned something else. What was it? You mentioned. What was it else you mentioned? You talked about Vietnam War and about Austria.
Austria. What was it now? Well, it was really saying that America sort of hyped itself up. The Austro-Hungarian Empire hyped itself up with Mozart, and these sort of images to kind of boost themselves when they've lost. I mean, the Austro-Hungarian Empire apparently lost a lot of wars, and they were losing, and it was to just sort of give them, it's Vienna is the capital of music, and this, that, and the other, and whatever, over Mozart, who was, according to Robert Newman, average. This is nothing special.
It's a way of manipulating public self-esteem, the collective sense of consciousness in a time of war, especially, or a time of strife. That is always something that states will always want to do. They want to
stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, people will want people to think and feel a certain way, and if there's a reason to be demoralised or for reasons people lose faith in the state, something will come along to restore that faith. I mean, there's a very well-known idea about the Falklands War, that this happened at a particular time when the government, that is Margaret Thatcher and her government, were very unpopular, and for her it was a kind of a way of boosting her popularity. I don't know if that's true, but it's a well-known theory associated with this. And my friend Dr. Nick Colostrom has written a book called Thatcher's Torpedo. Do you know Nick?
Oh yeah. Well, I haven't. I've actually met him. Very nice.
Yeah, he's a lovely chap, and he's pretty clever. His book is quite shocking. Now, again, I don't know if this is true or not. I mean, there's several other people who've been talking about the Falklands War, like David Griffin. suggest there's other reasons behind it. But he did say that what happened was there was an incident where an Argentine ship was sunk by a British submarine. And this, you say there's nothing really particularly special about this, because during that conflict, 3 British ships were sunk by Argentina. Yet this was the first ship to be sunk. And Nick was saying this is the General Belgrano, sunk by HMS Conqueror, a British submarine. Nick's book talks about how this was intended to keep the war going, or to make sure that the peace process didn't work, because at that time there were moves in the United States and the United Nations to put an end to the occupation, for Argentina to pull out. And they were trying to negotiate Argentina pulling out of the Falklands after their invasion. And it could have been possible to solve that matter peacefully, but the sinking of the Belgrano, in a sense, put an end to that and ensured that the war could or the conflict, it was called. I don't know if it's true or not.
Well, I think
it's a possibility.
I think it is possible, because I remember a woman who actually cornered Margaret Thatcher on a phone-in program. It was on the television, and she said, "I'm sorry, you're lying. The Belgrano was on its way back to the base. It did not threaten the Falklands at all." And shortly afterwards, that woman died. Strange, isn't it?
I saw that. Yeah, Nick actually read that in one of his interviews. I think it was the one on This Planet. Thatcher there, she kept saying, "No, it was a threat to our ships. It was a threat to our ships."
You have to believe me. That was it. Do you remember? Yeah. You have to believe me.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's an interesting interview, because you get repeating the same. It's a very mind control kind of thing too. It's a very Tavistock Institute. Repeating phrases, staring at the camera like that. Now, our surface competence is a threat to ships. Yes, I know. But as I've just explained, as Nick explains in his book, there were negotiations going on in the United Nations at the time, which might have been successful. They might have cancelled the war. And for whatever reason, the government didn't want that war cancelled. They wanted to go ahead.
Yeah.
So the ships in that ship and more a kind of Pearl Harbor maneuver in a way.
Yes.
Because, the Pearl Harbor, I believe, was done for the same reason.
Oh, yes. Roosevelt knew exactly that was going to happen. But with war, really, the first, as the old saying goes, the first casualty is truth. And what happened, there's a big cover-up about the end of the First World War. Because what happened at the end of the First World War, what they don't tell you, and this is true, is half the French army sort of mutinied and refused to go to the front. The German Navy mutinied and marched inland with weapons. In Scotland, workers went on strike because they had a gutful of the war. And it was public protests which brought an end to that war. And also, Germany had actually won the First World War. They made a breakthrough. They were pushing France and Britain back. And it's only because the Americans were brought into the war due to the sinking of the, I think it was the Lusitania, and that was contrived. And it was just American might that actually brought an end to that war. And also the communists in Berlin created mayhem and strikes and whatever. So it's really people power that really brought an end to the First World War. It's horrifying to think that it might have gone on for longer if it hadn't been for that, because it would have been going on for 4.5 years and there have been 18 million dead. I mean, we talked on the last show, was it this program where we talked about a big explosion in New York? No, I don't think it's this one, no.
Well, I was discussing on a program within the last couple of weeks of a huge explosion in New York City of an ammunition depot, which was blamed on German agents. So it was very similar to the Lusitania. It was like a false flag operation. Ironically, very close to the World Trade, where the World Trade Center would end up being built.
Yes.
And so again, we see first of all, we see that the war, America's entry into the war was actually, again, the first casualty of war is truth. The first method of starting a war is to get people to feel they're under attack. The necessity for war has to be put into the minds of people. And then to continue that war, which is in pure military terms, was the most horrific war the world has ever seen, without a doubt. It was incredibly difficult. Now, I didn't know that. I know about the Spartacist uprising in Germany, Rosa Luxemburg, etc. And I heard about the French, the French and of course the Russians.
Russian Revolution, 1917, yeah.
Led to the Cold War. But I didn't know that was actually the cause of the end of the war.
Well, it was all these things combined. It was also the Americans, given what they used to, my granddad used to call a doughboy. They came in because they had the, like in the Second World War, they could outproduce the enemy because they had such industrial might. I mean, that's basically what ran the Second World War. For every tank that the Germans lost, the Americans could build half a dozen. They were just literally rolling tanks off the production line so fast. There's a factory in, I think it's California, the Boeing factory, which is a mile long. And the raw materials were going on one end and a flying fortress bomber would come out the other end. And I don't know the rate that they were doing it, but it was a phenomenal rate. They were actually turning out these bombers. So if they lost a few, it wouldn't really make much difference because they could replace them, whereas Germany couldn't.
That's the great American industry, which of course at the time the United States was the greatest. I mean, sadly it's not anymore. But there's it's interesting about the Pearl Harbor attack in December of 1941 because this was basically where Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the naval base on Hawaii. Now, without that event, would it have been possible for the politicians to have persuaded the American public to get involved in World War II? Because Franklin D. Roosevelt, the president, he'd actually been elected on a policy, a foreign policy that was effectively isolationist and pacifist. He actually said, he was actually saying, he made a speech at the beginning of World War, when the war in Europe started, saying, he actually stated to the people without any qualification that the United States would remain neutral. And he told the people that. He promised them that. Now, if you said that, you have to, I mean, this is like Brexit, isn't it? You say something and you have to go back on it. You have to find a reason to go back on it. And this is why, I mean, I'm curious to see what reason the government is going to come up with when it comes to Brexit. Incidentally.
I'm curious as well. It's going to be interesting, isn't it? What is the excuse?
There maybe will have to be another Pearl Harbor. But you see, the Pearl Harbor attack was very interesting because they actually placed Japan under a trade embargo. So the United States was provoking Japan very, very much, very, very intently.
That's right.
There's a strategy document that came out a few years earlier called Propaganda in the Next War. This was before the war had even been declared. So, what next war are you talking about? People who read it, so what's it all about? But they did say that the United States could be goaded into war, into a global war, by a foreign power in the Pacific region by attacking them within the Pacific region, that is the west coast of Hawaii. And there's a perfect candidate for that. Because if you're going to have a war, you have to have two equally matched powers, a world war.
Yes. You
have to have two equally matched powers. There was only one other major naval power in the Pacific at that time, was Japan. So he said we need Japan to attack the United States, and to do that, you have to persuade the United States to have the United States an enemy. They faced Japan under terrible embargoes, trade embargoes, what we would today call sabotage, rather like what has been done to the Russian oil industry in the last year.
Yeah.
They did that for Japan. And eventually, Japan was provoked into attacking Pearl Harbor. Now, interestingly, they did so with impunity. There was no real defense of Pearl Harbor. And this was because there was a stand-down order.
That's right. They also ignored the radar, didn't they?
Yeah, there's a guy called Admiral Husband Kimmel who's been blamed for this.
That's right. His family want to clear his name, don't they?
Yeah, they're campaigning right now, even though he died a long time ago. They're trying to clear this man's name. Ian R. Crane's talks about this. He's the guy who really was the fall guy for the whole thing. But really, he was acting on orders from national command to stand down. So what happened was the Japanese came in. Interestingly, they went straight for the big big gun battleships. There's these great big battleships, you know, the Arizona, etc. You can still visit, the wreck is still there, and there's like a pontoon above it, and people throw flowers to this day. And you can still see the mast sticking above the water. But the thing about it is, by the 1940s, that kind of weapons platform was pretty much obsolete. The decisive weapon in World War II were the submarine and the aircraft carrier. These big gun battleships were really pretty much useless. Losing them cost America nothing in terms of sea power.
That's right.
In that particular era. And guess where the aircraft carriers were? They were all out at sea.
Yeah.
They were out at sea on exercise, every single one of them.
Funny that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mind you, I think submarine warfare also is really, that's what it is now.
And you know what? The Pearl Harbor submarine, so the Pearl Harbor submarine base was not touched.
Funny that,
the Japanese flew straight over it, and they hit the big gun battleships. So it was a great symbolic disaster, Pearl Harbor, for the United States, and it generated headlines to see these proud ships burning up, turning over, and sinking in their berths. But in terms of the actual warfare, no real feasible and valid asset lost.
That's
very
right.
convenient, that, isn't it?
That's right. I mean, it's like with the Vietnam War, there was a lot of people that believe that it was actually contrived because the Americans were told to hold back sometimes when they could have actually gone right the way through up to the north. And they don't know why they were told to hold back. But what it was a war that helped the arms industry. The arms industry wanted it to keep going because they're making so much money out of it. And because wars are good for the banks and they're good for the arms industries because they sell more weapons. So it's in their interests. Yeah. And there's lots of instances. There was a book, I can't remember the damn name of it now, that was out by a chap, I think he was a senior diplomat, who had evidence that whilst the Vietnam War was going on and the Cold War was going on, two sides were secretly in negotiations with each other, planning the war out, saying, okay, well, we'll hold back there, we do this, we do this, we do that. And that's, they said, that was really what it was all about. Because you had China, they were, and Russia was supplying arms to North Vietnam, and America, it was, there was more in that than meets the eye with the Vietnam War. In fact, every war, there's more in it than meets the eye. I mean, back to the Falklands, I remember when the Falklands War started, I thought, I've never been so wrong in all my life. I thought, that's the end of Thatcher. She's finished. She's out of office now. We're going to have a change of government. Wrong. She gained popularity. I was shocked.
They won. The Britons won. They actually ousted the junta by force, so the invasion was repelled by force. And of course, that's the biggest feather in her cap she possibly won. She gained an enormous amount of political kudos from this victory. However, some people played that was the only reason the war took place, because of that. Oh. And then Nick Colostrom in the book said, obviously, it says that she wanted war. The government wanted desperately to have this war, and it was engineered into continuing to the point of pull out the exchange of fire. And so it certainly benefited.
It was a way of getting battlefield-proven weaponry, and it's a very good sales for the arms industry, isn't it? I mean, when you think about it, the French sold a hell of a lot of missiles. Was it Exocet, I think it was? Yes. And Mirage jets. And Britain sold a heck of a lot. I mean, I remember when the task force, as they called it, was, because everything after that was called a task force, and they were sailing down to Argentina. In the newspapers, it's the most high-tech war ever. They showed all these scientific, science fiction type gadgets that the forces are going to use. And my dad, I'll never forget it, he looked at my mum and said, "We've heard that one before, haven't we?" And on the news that night in the, what was that bay called there, where they had those aircraft attacking the ships before the disaster that it was with the Sir Galahad, something bay, and you saw a bloke with a second World War machine gun tied with a lump of rope to the balustrade of the ship, going boom, 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 boom to these jets. But I said, look, high tech, isn't it? We had those during the war. And he was, in a sort of a, I suppose you could call it black humour way. He said, oh, we've heard it all before. He said, it's going to be as crude can be. And it was very crude.
Yeah, that was the Royal Fleet Auxiliary.
That's right. St. Carlos Bay, that was it. St. Carlos.
Oh, yeah. That was beachhead. That was St. Carlos beachhead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I actually had a girlfriend once whose brother had been on that ship, and he was terribly burnt.
Oh.
When the missile hit the ship, a lot of the troops on board died, and some of them came home, but they had terrible injuries. I mean, Simon Weston is a famous one for that. You'll know him because he is starred from this particular experience, injuries he had. But you mentioned the military industrial complex. Of course, through all the wars, this has happened. That banks make a lot of money. War is very expensive. And I mean, it's the scale of modern warfare is so expensive. If you wouldn't actually fractional reserve lending and the banking cartels who were able to lend nation states so much money to do it, wars like this couldn't happen. World War I could not have happened without the Federal Reserve Act. Why? Because it would be too expensive. Well, without the Bank of England, without the Federal Reserve, without all these other fiat currency lenders, war could not have one scale that we have in this century and beyond could not happen.
Although they did have but they did have the Bradbury pound, didn't they? They introduced, I think it was Lloyd George, who was the Chancellor at the beginning of World War I, and he became Prime Minister, I think, in 1916. He introduced the Bradbury pound, which was debt-free currency, and for some unknown reason in 1916, when he became Prime Minister, it was phased out, and the banks got this country into massive debt, because at the beginning in 1914, this country was bankrupt, and the last Bradbury pound, I think, was printed in 1927. So that's when we did have debt-free currency. Without
you make a toll company that either you for the Bradbury pound or you end up like Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was shot by a guy called John Balloon. And again, the security guards were nowhere to be seen. He walked straight into the theatre, up to the private box. Now, this guy was a security risk. He was a supporter of the Confederacy in the Civil War, hated the president. Just walked straight in, and no one stopped him and shot him. Now, what could that be? Because Abraham Lincoln has instructed the US Treasury to issue a currency independently of the banking system, the greenback dollar. And you see, if it wasn't, again, the American Civil War itself was funded to an enormous extent on both sides by the banks, as was World War I, as was World War II. And I mean, Anthony Sutton, a very interesting researcher, discovered basically the Cold War is the most extreme example of this. And we mentioned that the Falklands War, the French stuff that the Falklands War, I mean, all both sides were using French material. The British, for example, the British and Argentines were both using the F-gun rifle, which is French made. They were using the very same weapons. You mentioned the Mirage jet, again, capable fighter interceptor. The Exocet missile, which actually devastated the Royal Navy, all from France. And so the French military industrial complex made an absolute fortune off the Falklands War, off both sides, off the casualties of both sides. Maybe they were the ones who told Thatcher to go and sink that ship.
Who knows? But I mean, it was a chap called Clark, a historian. He was a Conservative MP and a historian. I think, was it Kenneth Clark? He was in the Thatcher government, and he caused uproar because he said that Britain could have kept out the First World War and supplied both and made a fortune out of it, like we did with the Russian-Japanese War of 1905. We supplied both sides. We did the same with the first. We could have watched Europe boil, whilst we just sat back and supplied both sides. He said because Europe under the Kaiser wouldn't have been probably that bad. So, and he caused uproar, and that was in the 80s. I think it was Kenneth Clark, something Clark.
Kenneth Clark? The Kenneth Clark?
No, not the Kenneth Clark. He's dead now, this chap. oh, what was it? I think that name rings a bell. He was a writer. He wrote "Oh, What a Lovely War."
Oh, I don't know. But I mean, what he's saying is very interesting, because we were talking on the last show about how when you're in war and the media is like beating the war drums and they're stirring people up against the enemy, they're terrifying them, making them believe they're under attack. Very often it's only years later, and when people step back and take a detached look, they realise the whole thing was like a game of chess. And both the soldiers and the people at home had just been playing like pieces on a board. And the number, the destruction caused and the number of casualties is completely irrelevant. There are no moral considerations ever taken into account.
Oh, just cannon fodder, isn't it? Really, when you think about it. Have you ever known a time? I was thinking this the other day. Have you ever known a time when there hasn't been a crisis? I mean, I grew up during the Cold War. Before that, my parents' generation were frightened of naughty Germans. My grandparents were frightened of naughty Germans. I was made to fear naughty Soviets. Now we're told to fear naughty Middle Eastern men wearing pajamas. I mean, who's next on the list? We've always got to fear something.
I know, it's kind of a mixture today. It's the Muslims, but it's also the Russians and
That's right.
Always.
Yeah.
It's like we can't live without it. In fact, there's never been a single day in human history when something like this has been going on.
Yeah.
Now, of course, people do get into conflicts. It's inevitably happens. However, I'm really perplexed that it reaches such an extent that we go out and will systematically wipe out or plan to wipe out vast proportions of our own species. Is this our nature? Are we designed to commit suicide like this on such a mass level? Or is something else going on? Are we under the control of some kind of malevolent force that is manipulating us to behave in this way?
Well, my belief is that wars are psychopaths' playgrounds, but they rarely get involved in fighting them. They get people to fight them. And well, going back to what we were talking about last week, I've been in offices where everybody's getting on fine, everybody having a laugh, and it's nice. And then suddenly you get someone that ticks all the boxes of a psycho, and then people start to be suspicious of each other, grumpy with each other, stressed out of their minds. And when you look at the characters that are in these wars, now Winston Churchill, he was obviously narcissistic. And if you look at the book about his school teacher, I mean, he was an unruly child.
He was psychotic.
He was. Death to him, millions meant. It's like Stalin said. He said, this is sick what he said. He said, the death of one person is a tragedy. The death of thousands or millions is just a mere statistic. And it's sick. And it's right. And it's the psychopaths that start all this going.
Yeah, and they don't fight the wars. I mean, some people there never left Downing Street. He never had to put on a uniform. He never had to pick up a rifle or put on a tin hat. He spent that entire war in a suit in his office, as did George W. Bush, as do others, Margaret Thatcher, Winston Churchill. These people, they get the working class to go out and fight the wars. They're the guys who get drafted.
Oh, that's right.
The school leavers, and they're the ones who get drafted. And you can't go to them and explain that what they're doing is cruel and it's cowardly, because the psychopath has no principles, no sense of moral standards, none at all, no sense of fair play. They won't understand that.
Well, no, because they've got no humanity. They have their emotion. They don't really have the same emotions. They mimic our emotions, but they're not. This is why I do believe that, Dr. Hare, I've said this several times, has come very close, allegedly, to saying that psychopaths are a subspecies of human. They're not quite human. And I think he's near enough. And I'm wondering whether the psychopaths are put on Earth to keep the population down. Because let's face it, without psychopaths, we'll have wars. We'd have disagreements.
It's very interesting that. Because obviously psychopaths have a physical presence which is human. I mean, they've anatomically part of the human species, but they don't have a human soul. And this is why, when people like David and I come out with their ideas about the idea that there's an elite group of people who are literally non-human, but disguised as human, in control of the world, I take him seriously.
I do, and I think people have got the wrong end of the stick, like they always get the wrong end of the stick. I think that I'm not too sure about shape-shifting and that type of thing. I'm the jury's out on that one, but I do believe they have a presence about them, and I've noticed this in various offices where I've worked. This presence where people will become, well, you've got to prove who you are, and you've got to prove this, you've got to prove that, you've got to prove everything else. You've got to prove what you're doing all the time, and you just think, why can't you get on with your work? Why do you have to keep proving everything? And it's like a kind of Satanism. It really is.
Satanism. I mean, I'm afraid I have to go now, Chris. But you know what? What you just said is like an opening statement for another complete program we could do. Because
next Wednesday, same time.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'll probably hang on. So look, I can't manage next Wednesday, but any other time we can go into that because. It is really true. I think we have to examine the spiritual side of this matter. We are dealing with an inhuman, malevolent consciousness that's we work on our planet.
I'm positive.
Funny, we started talking about UFOs and aliens. Now we're talking about malevolent consciousnesses. It's not the same thing. We haven't come circle.
Well, no, it is very, very similar because I noticed that with psychopaths. I mean, the one in my family. I'll give an example. Laptops when they really were in their infancy. I got one, and you couldn't get onto the internet. Didn't exist then, and there was a chess game called Battle Chess. I used to play chess a lot, and I took it over to my relative, in-law, shall we say, and the whole computer went at a quarter of the speed it normally went. I took it back home; it worked perfectly. And everything electrical went wrong with them. And lights would dim, fridges would blow up. And it was really spooky. And you had it was like a kind of a rain cloud or a mist that came in virtue in negativity. You felt negative. Everything was negative about them. And I've noticed when I've worked with these people that ticked all the boxes of psycho, they had this sort of weird presence where they got people to do, ordinary, decent people to do the most horrible things and think horrible things. And there's something, how do you get thousands of people to go and into a war and kill a load of other people that don't even know? It's uncanny.
Yeah, I'm afraid I have to go now, Chris.
Okay, Ben, well, thoroughly enjoyed it. Point. And we'll do another program. Not next Wednesday, but we'll make a time and I'll announce it on Facebook. Yeah. So it should be on there. That's
brilliant. I'd love to talk to you some more another time.
So
thank you for having me on the show again. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. And by the way, it should be exciting on Friday. I'm talking to Ellie of Torbay Humanity Torbay. So
can I just say one more? Can I just ask someone one more thing?
Certainly.
Okay. If people are interested in the UFO issue, this is a good book to read. Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure, and I wrote that, and there's two sequels to it. So please do check that out.
Oh, and also your radio program. How rude of me not to mention it. It's Panwo. You know better than I do. Was it? HBA Panwo is Hospital Quarters Against the New World Order. That's my website. I've got a radio program like Chris does, and other things as well. I have a YouTube channel too. Do you broadcast on a regular time? Don't you?
Yeah, every Thursday I try to get a show in. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, and what time is that?
8 p.m.
8 p.m. Right. Oh, so we got that. So I didn't quite catch the last bit. It's .com.
.blogspot.
Oh, sorry. .blogspot.
.com. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, there in a minute. Great. I'm ever so sorry I haven't mentioned this before. How rude of me. I'm terribly
sorry. I didn't bring up either. But I've got to go. But thanks very much, Chris.
Thank you.
I'll get in touch with you and we'll arrange another time for the show.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Ben. See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Right, I'll just end the broadcast there. There we go. End broadcast. So I'll just go over to here.
I've got to go now.